You've probably been on one. Maybe you dozed off in a plastic seat while the Solent slid past the window. The rumble of engines below deck, polystyrene cups of tea from the onboard cafe, and seagulls wheeling above the port as the tannoy announces that all drivers should return to their vehicles. Millions of crossings are made every year without incident, and the British ferry is as ordinary as a bus queue. Let us begin with a vessel you can see from the coast road in North Wales without ever stepping aboard. The Duke of Lancaster sits in the mud of the Dee estuary at Llanerch y Mor in Flintshire. 376 feet of rusting steel, looking like a ship that ran aground in a farmer's field. She was built by Harland and Wolff in Belfast in 1956, the same shipyard that built the Titanic. For over 2 decades, she served as a passenger ferry on routes from Heysham to Belfast. She was retired in 1978, towed to Flintshire the following year, and concreted permanently into the dock. The plan was a leisure complex called the Fun Ship. An amusement arcade was installed across an entire deck. Then, planning disputes killed the project. By the middle of the 1980s, the Fun Ship fell silent. She has SAT there ever since. Over 40 years in the Welsh mud. Urban explorers who have gained access report the bar still standing. The cinema still intact. Visitors describe feeling watched. Metallic clangs echoing from deep inside the hull when nobody else is aboard. In 2013, graffiti artists were commissioned to paint the hull in an attempt to rebrand the vessel as an art installation. The colours have since faded. The ship remains. Local children dare each other to approach the fence at dusk. Some have reported seeing a figure standing at one of the upper portholes, though no one has lived aboard for decades. Moving north to Dundee, we find the last traditional wooden 3-masted ship ever built in Britain. RRS Discovery was launched in 1901 to carry Robert Falcon Scott and Ernest Shackleton to Antarctica. She is now permanently docked at Discovery Point and operates as a museum. She has also earned a reputation as one of the most haunted vessels in Europe. A seaman named Charles Bonner fell from the main mast during the ship's departure from New Zealand. He struck the iron deckhouse below and died of his injuries. Staff at Discovery Point report phantom footsteps below deck, hushed conversations in rooms where nobody is present, and a light above Shackleton's bunk that blew repeatedly with no electrical explanation. Ghost hunt events are now held on the ship after dark. Some attendees do not last the night. One group reported the temperature in the lower hold dropping so sharply that their breath became visible in July. Another described the sound of something heavy being dragged across the deck above them, though the upper deck was sealed and empty. Staying in Scotland but moving to the Clyde, we come to a vessel that is still very much alive. The PS Waverley is the last sea-going paddle steamer in the world. Built in 1946 and named after the debut novel of Sir Walter Scott. A national treasure. Also a vessel with a troubling pattern. On the 3rd of September 2020, the Waverley made heavy contact with Brodick Pier on the Isle of Arran. 24 of the 239 people aboard were injured. The Marine Accident Investigation Branch concluded the engine had become locked at top dead center. A known issue with steam engines, but one the chief engineer had not been trained to handle. It was at least the 4th time the vessel had struck harbours in the Clyde since 2009. Locals in Brodick describe the Waverley with complicated affection. They love her. They also know that her Victorian machinery operates on principles that modern safety regulations were invented to replace. Off the coast of the Isle of Wight, something older sails the water. The Isle of Wight has more reported ghost sightings per square mile than anywhere else in Britain. Among the most persistent is a 3-masted sailing ship that appears under full sail, passes the shoreline, and vanishes into nothing. HMS Eurydice sank in a sudden storm off Sandown in 1878. She was a Royal Navy training ship carrying over 300 young men. The squall came without warning. She went down in minutes. Nearly all hands were lost. For decades since, people have reported sightings. A group of friends on Compton Bay watched a 3-masted vessel sail towards the cliffs and disappear before their eyes. Similar reports come from fishermen, Coast Guard volunteers, and passengers on the Solent ferries. The ferry operators who cross the Solent daily do not discuss it, but several have admitted privately that the waters around the island feel different after dark. Before the bridges were built across the Menai Strait in North Wales, crossing between the mainland and Anglesey required a ferry. The records of those crossings read like a catalogue of drowning. In 1664, the Menai ferry had arrived at the Anglesey shore. Passengers were about to step off when a dispute broke out over a single penny. During the argument, the boat drifted into deeper water. It capsized. 79 people drowned, yards from the shore. On Christmas Day, 1806, the Conway ferry set out with 17 passengers. 15 drowned. The regular crew were not all aboard. The survivors reported that the man at the helm begged passengers to sit still. Their panicked movements overturned the vessel. These were not isolated incidents. The Menai crossings claimed hundreds of lives across centuries. The bridges eventually made them redundant. But locals along the strait will tell you that on certain winter evenings, when the tide runs hard and the wind drops to nothing, you can hear sounds from the water that are not the sea. Between the northernmost tip of mainland Scotland and the Orkney Islands lies the Pentland Firth, one of the most dangerous stretches of navigable water in the world. Tidal currents here have been measured at 16 knots. The sea does not flow through the firth so much as it attacks it. Whirlpools form and dissolve without warning. The Norse called one of them the Swilky, meaning the swallower. The MV Hamnavoy has served the Scrabster to Stromness crossing since 2003. The voyage takes 90 minutes. In winter, storms routinely force the suspension of sailings. In July 2022, the MV Alfred ran aground on the island of Swona after the master fell asleep at the helm. Over 80 passengers had to be rescued by lifeboats. Locals in Stromness who depend on this crossing describe their relationship with the Firth plainly. You cross when the water lets you. You do not cross when it does not. The sea decides. Now we come to the real disasters. For many people watching, these will be personal. On the 31st of January 1953, the car ferry Princess Victoria left Stranraer at 7:45 in the morning, bound for Larne. She was one of the earliest roll-on roll-off ferries in Britain. Her captain, James Ferguson, had worked the crossing for 17 years. A gale warning was in force, but he chose to sail. Loch Ryan is sheltered. The force of the wind was not apparent inside it. Once clear of the loch, the Princess Victoria turned west and exposed her stern to 30-foot seas. Within minutes, the stern doors were burst open by a wave. Water flooded the car deck. The ship began to list. The radio operator David Broadfoot sent distress signals until the vessel went down. He was awarded a posthumous George Cross. Captain Ferguson received a posthumous George Medal. All the ship's officers died. Of the 44 survivors, every single one was male. No women survived. No children survived. 135 people died. Both Stranraer and Larne were small communities. Most families lost someone. That grief has never fully lifted. If you have never heard this next story, prepare yourself. In the early hours of New Year's Day, 1919, the yacht Iolaire was carrying naval reservists home to Lewis and Harris. These men had survived the entire war. Years of service at sea and in the trenches. They were coming home. Their families were waiting at the quayside in Stornoway to greet them. The vessel struck the rocks known as the Beasts of Holm, just yards from the mouth of Stornoway Harbour. in sight of the harbour lights, in sight of the families waiting on the pier. Over 200 men drowned. The exact number will never be known because there was no passenger list and the ship was overcrowded. Men who could not swim were dragged down by their heavy greatcoats and boots. The youngest to die was a 17-year-old signal boy from Aberdeen. An estimated 250 children across the islands were left without fathers. One man changed everything. John F. MacLeod from Port of Ness jumped from the sinking vessel with a heaving line clenched in his teeth. He reached the rocks. He hauled a hawser to shore. Most of the survivors owed their lives to that single act. For decades, the people of Lewis could only whisper the name Iolaire. The Admiralty suppressed the inquiry findings until 1970. The wreck site is now a protected war grave. The community of Ness alone lost 23 men in a single night. One family had already buried 3 sons in France. Their 4th surviving son drowned within sight of his home. On the 6th of March 1987, the roll-on roll-off ferry Herald of Free Enterprise left the port of Zeebrugge, bound for Dover, with over 530 people aboard. She capsized within 90 seconds of departure. 193 people died. The cause was not a storm, not a mechanical failure. The bow doors were open. The assistant boatswain, whose job it was to close them, was asleep in his bunk. The first officer assumed someone else had done it. The captain left port without knowing. The ship filled with water before anyone understood what was happening. Most of the victims were trapped inside the vessel and died of hypothermia in the freezing water. Many had been travelling on a cheap day trip promoted by a national newspaper. Families with children, pensioners on a day out, people who expected to be home by tea time. The subsequent inquiry described a disease of sloppiness running through the entire company. 7 individuals were charged with gross negligence manslaughter. Every case collapsed. A memorial in St. Mary's Church in Dover lists all 193 names. On the night of the 20th of August 1989, the pleasure boat Marchioness was carrying 131 people up the Thames. She had been hired for a birthday party. Most of the guests were in their 20s. Music was playing. People were dancing below deck. At 1:46 in the morning, the dredger Bowbell struck the Marchioness from behind. The pleasure boat was rolled over and forced under the water. She sank in 30 seconds. Those below deck had no chance. 51 people died. The birthday host Antonio de Vasconcelos was among them. So was the captain Stephen Faldo. Neither vessel had seen the other in time. What followed made everything worse. The coroner ordered the hands of over 20 victims to be removed for fingerprint identification. Some of those hands were never returned to the bodies. Families were not told until much later. A memorial stone in Southwark Cathedral lists the names and ages of the 51 dead. The Bowbell was sold, renamed twice, and sank off the coast of Madeira in 1996. The Woolwich Ferry has been crossing the Thames in some form since at least 1308. The modern free service dates to 1889 and carries over 1 million passengers a year. It is utterly mundane, a commuter route, a 10-minute crossing that most Londoners take without a second thought. But the Thames at Woolwich runs dark and fast. Bodies surface here with grim regularity. Ferry crews have stopped during crossings to assist police with recoveries from the water. The docklands were bombed heavily during the Blitz. Entire streets flattened overnight. The ground here is layered with unquiet history. At night, the ferry runs a reduced service. 1 vessel, fewer lights on the water. The river fills in the silence. Before the Humber Bridge opened in 1981, the only way across the estuary was by ferry. The crossing had been operating since 1315, when King Edward II granted Hull a royal charter to run boats to Barton in Lincolnshire. By the 1820s, paddle steamers were making the run from Hull to New Holland. The crossing was notorious. The Humber is wide, shallow, tidal, and vicious in bad weather. Fog descended without warning. The sands of the estuary shifted continuously, forcing skippers to take long, sweeping arcs rather than straight lines. When the bridge finally opened on the 24th of June, 1981, the ferries stopped for good. The paddle steamers that once carried 30,000 passengers a year are scattered. The Tattershall Castle sits on the Thames embankment in London, serving as a floating pub. The Wingfield Castle went home to Hartlepool. The Lincoln Castle was scrapped. Walk the estuary shore at New Holland today, and you will see the pier stretching into the grey water. No passengers. No plume of smoke from a departing steamer. Just the mud, the wind, and the memory of a crossing that connected two counties for over 600 years. The bridge took the traffic. It did not take the atmosphere. If you have taken a ferry crossing in this country, you trusted the vessel, the crew, and the water to bring you safely to the other side. Most of the time they do. These 12 are the times they did not. The crossings where something went wrong, and the water kept what it took.